Welcome to this KWK talk. So the talk is starting now, and I request our director, Dr. B.R. Guruprasad, to welcome you all.
First of all, our apologies for being late, and good afternoon to all of you. Uh, Welcome to yet another lecture under Copy with Curiosity, jointly organized by ICTS and uh, JNP. And today we have Ms. Pallavi Bhatt speaking on a very, very interesting and very apt and appropriate subject at this time. Okay, magnetic reconnection, the engine behind solar flares and aurora. Whether we like it or not, we are experiencing all these things. So that's what I was discussing with her, whether sun is already angry or about to become angry at the most 2025, 2024 or even earlier. So all said and done, I don't want to stand between you and her for more number of time. And Anyway, I welcome her once again on behalf of JNP and ICTS for this kind gesture. So now I'll hand over the mic to Sharanya, please.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Professor Pratyush Kumar from ICTS to introduce the speaker.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Copy with Curiosity. It is my pleasure to introduce our colleague, Professor Pallavi Bhatt from the International Center for Theoretical Sciences. Dr. Bhatt's work has explored the origin, development, and dynamics of coherent magnetic fields in a variety of astrophysical situations. These situations span a range of scales, starting from the sun, stars, to galaxies and clusters of galaxies and so on. Professor Bhatt started her journey in this field during her PhD at the Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics in Pune. And from there, she went on to be a postdoctoral researcher at the Princeton University, the MIT, and the University of Leeds before joining ICTS a few years ago. And more recently, she's been working on magnetic reconnection, turbulent dynamos, magnetorotational instability in various astrophysical situations. And so today, I would like to invite her now to start her lecture on, the solar flares and tell us exactly what governs us, what governs them, and what to expect in the near future, I hope. Um, Before we start, we would like to present Pallavi with a small token of appreciation. Okay. Please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Prayush, for that kind introduction. And I'm really glad and happy to have this opportunity to talk to you all about magnetic reconnection, which is one of the most important plasma physics processes which has a big impact on the way astrophysics or astrophysical phenomena carry out in the universe. So without much further ado, I would like to first show you a video. So, as you can see, none of that was any animation, right? That is all very real. And these things are spectacular. So what are they? They are these light shows in the night sky called aurorae or auroras. And they typically occur around the polar regions. And if they are in the northern skies, then they are known as aurora borealis. And if they are in the southern skies, they are known as aurora australis. In particular, I want to talk to you about the auroras that took place on May 11th. On the night of May 11th, all over the world, there were these spectacular shows, and you would have seen a lot of chatter about it on the social media, right? So what was so special? The special thing was that usually these light shows occur close to the polar regions, but on that day, it occurred on latitudes which are much lower. So why did that happen? So before we get on to that, I would like to explain a little bit about the origin of these aurorae. And just for an example of the aurorae that occurred on that night, here is a photograph by Gunjan Sinha from Saskatchewan, Canada. So if you don't know already, then let me tell you that our Earth has a magnetic field. And this magnetic field is structured in a dipolar fashion, just exactly like how you would have if you had a bar magnet in the center of the Earth. And we know that there is a magnetic field on Earth because if you take your compass and move around, you will basically get to know where the north is or the south is because this magnetic field is showing you the direction. And that is because the magnetic axis is actually almost close to the rotational axis or the geographical axis. It's off by only about 10 to 11 degrees. Okay, so what happens is that the magnetosphere or this magnetic field basically contains a lot of highly energetic particles, okay? And those particles are interacting with the Earth's atmosphere over here and leading to aurorae. So let's get into a little bit of detail about how this happens. So here you see in this diagram that there is this particle which is kind of gyrating around this magnetic field line. So this is a particle which is trapped. And why is it trapped? So the equation of motion of this particle is such that it does this gyrating motion around the magnetic field. Now, how do we understand this? I mean, why this spiraling motion, right? So for that first, let's try to understand what, how a circular motion manifests. So here I show diagrammatically a simple example of how circular motion manifests. So if you take a rock and you tie a rope to it and then you give it a little bit of a swing and then you spin it around, then you get a continuous circular motion. You can have the rock performing a continuous circular motion because you're pulling on it. So you're continuously providing a force to the rock, making it make a circular motion, okay? And the important thing is that the direction of the force is perpendicular to the direction of the motion or the direction of the velocity, and that is sort of the signature of circular motion. Now, what's happening in the magnetosphere is that the electrically charged particle is being pulled by the magnetic field and making it circle around the field. And there is a slight velocity component also along the field, so it not only makes a circular motion, there's also a spiraling. So what this charged particle does is go up and down around the magnetic field, okay? So it goes from poles, one pole to another and back and so on. And the thing is that these particles, when they are very close to the polar regions, then they get to interact with the atmosphere there. And so they interact with the molecules in the atmosphere like oxygen and nitrogen. And what happens on this interaction? So these highly energetic particles, when they collide with these molecules, they transfer some of the energy to the molecules. So the molecules get excited. And once they're excited, they go from one energy level to another. But after some time, they come down. So they come back to the lower energy level. And in this process, they emit a photon or emit photons in general. So you get radiation. And that radiation is what you exactly see as aurorae. Okay. So these aurorae manifest in many variety of colors. So the most common color that you see is green, and that is because it is coming from the interaction with oxygen, and that's happening at some lower latitudes of 100 to 300 kilometers. And the red color also comes from oxygen interaction, but that is happening at a higher latitude, around 300 to 400 kilometers. And the blue and the purple come from nitrogen, hydrogen, helium, etc. And not only these colors, you actually get many others like pink and yellow, very surprisingly, but that's because there is some color mixing of these colors, and that's what is happening. So, I told you only part of the story till now, which is that, what happens to, how do you get these aurorae? But one can ask, where from did the charged particles arise in the first place in the magnetosphere? And for that, we have to go back a little bit, kind of zoom out. And when you zoom out, the full story actually has also the sun at the center of it. Okay? So what's happening is that on the surface of the sun, there are these highly energetic events called solar flares. You can think of them also as solar storms, due to which there are all these plasmas which are sent out of the sun towards the earth. And that travels along with the solar wind, and then it interacts with the magnetosphere on earth. By the way, if we didn't have this magnetic field, if we didn't have the magnetosphere, then we would be slammed by these really fast particles, because they're coming at the speed of 500 kilometers per second, and nothing would have survived. So thankfully we do have a magnetic field, we do have a magnetosphere. Then what happens is the plasma interacts with the magnetosphere, and some of the charged particles get transferred into the the magnetosphere, and that's where from it leads to aurorae, etc. So coming back to the question, what was so special about May 11th? Why was there such a spectacular, intense aurorae? That is because, particularly on May 11th, after a decade, we had like the highest level of intensity of solar flare or solar storm, which is why we had this kind of display of lights on that night. Okay? So to understand what solar flares are, we first will try to understand what sun is and what plasmas are, and then we will get to solar flares. So let me tell you a little bit about the sun first. Okay, so sun is the star at the center of our solar system. So basically it is a big ball of ionized gas or plasma which radiates. So at the very core, the temperature is very high, about 15 million Kelvin. And as you come up to the surface, the temperature reduces to about 600 Kelvin, which is a difference of about 3 orders of magnitude. And the interior structure is a sophisticated one. So at the very core, you have nuclear reactions taking place, so which is basically generating the loads and loads of energy that you are getting from the sun. And that is basically due to the reactions of hydrogen fusing with hydrogen to give helium, etc. And now this energy can be transported from the interior to the outside in multiple modes of energy transport. Now, one mode is radiation, which occurs in the inner radii, but as you come towards the outer radii, it is convection which takes over. So there is overturning motions of plasma which occurs, just like how you have water boiling in your hot pot. So this is what is happening with the sun. And if you look at like the surface of the sun, this is like a high resolution observation of the surface of the sun, you notice all this granulation, and that is basically a signature of the convective motions that's happening underneath. So each of these granules that you see is due to, each of these granules that you see is basically one convective cell under which all this overturning is happening. So now let's go in a little bit into the plasma physics, in the sense that what are these plasmas like? Okay, so how do we think of these plasmas? So first of all, you may know that plasma is like the fourth state of matter. So what happens is, if you increase the temperature, then progressively the material disassociates further and further. So from solid you get liquid, and from liquid you get gas, and from gas you get plasmas, right? So you have atoms disassociating to give you charged particles. Now these charged particles together, how do you think of them? How do you treat them? So one way to think of them is that you can treat them like a fluid. Okay, so just like how you treat gas as a fluid, you can even treat plasma as a fluid. So this is the first thing that I want to tell you about plasmas. The second thing is that most astrophysical plasmas, including the plasma in the sun, are highly conducting. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that basically you can have currents without much resistance. So if you go back to your high school physics, then you basically have a wire and you apply like a voltage across the wire, then there is a current which passes through it, and depending on the resistance you get more power or less power, etc. So you can think of this in a similar fashion, that if you have very highly conducting plasma, then the electrical resistance is very low. Okay, so you can have currents very easily. So this will become an important thing later on. Then the other interesting thing is that most plasmas, astrophysical plasmas, host magnetic fields. Okay, so like I was telling you before, the Earth has a magnetic field. Now even Sun has magnetic fields on it, but it is much more complex in nature. So as you can see, the magnetic fields inferred from the observations are basically sticking out from the surface of the sun, and they are not as simple as some dipolar structure. And these fields are extremely dynamic, so they keep changing in time and space and so on. So the other example of magnetic fields being there in most astrophysical systems is this galaxy, is this particular galaxy that I'm showing you. It's a spiral galaxy. For those who don't know what galaxies are, they are a collection of billions of stars, and so like our solar system would be like a very tiny patch in this galaxy over here. So in fact, even our solar system lies in a galaxy which is called the Milky Way galaxy, and that galaxy is also spiral in nature. So what you can see here is that there are these contour lines which come from radio observational data, and that is indicative of the magnetic field in the galaxy. So you not only have magnetic fields in stars, but you have magnetic fields in galaxies, and not just because it's a collection of stars. It's there because there is gas in the galaxy apart from just stars, and this magnetic field is manifesting in the gas in the galaxy. Okay, and if you see these yellow lines are basically telling you both the strength and also the direction of the magnetic field on the plane of the sky. So if you observe closely, you can see these yellow lines are actually well aligned with the spiral arms of the galaxy, telling you that there are these big coherent magnetic fields on even the galactic scales. So magnetic fields are there in almost all systems, and so this is an important thing that that basically most of the plasmas host magnetic fields. Now let me tell you a little bit about how do we study these systems. To study these systems, you need a framework called magnetohydrodynamics. Now because I'm showing you equations, please don't get worried. I am not going to get into very many details of anything. I just want to show you these equations to tell you what is the use of these equations, what will they describe. So like a big picture view of what this is, okay. So actually the first two equations are regularly used to study fluids in general, so they form hydrodynamical equations. But since we are studying a fluid or a gas slash plasma, which is not just, it's not just neutral fluid, right? It is electrically charged, etc. So we need this third equation, which is what combines to give you magnetohydrodynamics. Otherwise, if you just want to study some neutral gas and neutral fluid, you just have the first two top equations, right? So now let me tell you a little bit more about each of these equations. The first equation comes about when you demand mass conservation. So what you're saying is that mass can neither be created nor destroyed, but this puts a restriction on how the mass density in the fluid can vary from one place to another. So if you want to track like how the mass density, the movement of the material and how much it varies from one place to another, etc., the first equation will tell you that. The second equation comes from demanding momentum conservation, and you may have studied it in high school, but even simpler way to look at it is to think of it as F equals ma, Newton's second law of motion, okay. So what's going on is that you have du by dt, which is basically the change of velocity with time. But what is change of velocity with time? It is acceleration, right? So acceleration multiplied by mass density on the left hand side, that's what you have. And on the right hand side you have all the forces. Now since we are not talking about a single object, we are talking about this fluid. So when you are looking at the fluid, you have to look at it patch by patch, which is why you don't have one whole mass on the left hand side, you have mass density, okay. And even on the right hand side, you don't just have forces, but you have force densities. So what can change the fluid? You can have forces due to the magnetic field, you can have forces due to the thermal pressure, etc., or you can have some external forcing, gravity, etc., okay. So this is your F equals ma. And then the third equation basically is coming from the fact that you have magnetism, you have electricity. So if you've heard of Maxwell's laws, which you might not have heard if you're not already doing your bachelor's or something. So that is basically, those are the laws which govern electricity and magnetism. And here in this equation, one is looking at how the magnetic field evolves over time and space. So one very important consequence of magnetohydrodynamics is the fact that there is something called flux freezing. And what is flux freezing? It's basically that all these magnetic field lines are frozen into the plasma, okay. So as the fluid, the plasma moves around, the magnetic field lines move along with the plasma, okay. And if you look at this particular diagram, what it shows you is that if you have an area through which there are magnetic field lines going through, and that area changes because, you know, the flow is moving around, and that area is actually fixed to the flow elements, okay. And so that area changes after a period of time from S1 to S2, but the number of magnetic field lines passing through that area remains the same, Okay, it doesn't change. So you can think of magnetic flux as magnetic field strength into the area. Now the area has, now this magnetic flux is a conserved property, which means that if the area changes, the magnetic field strength goes down. Okay, so this is what is flux freezing, and an important consequence of this is that for highly conducting plasmas, the magnetic field topology will not change. Okay, so it will remain it will remain affixed with the plasma and it will not change. Okay, so now we are fully equipped with some plasma physics, and now we can start looking at what are solar flares and start learning more about them. Okay, so here is a video of a solar flare. So as you can see, what is happening is that there are these highly energetic events on the surface of the sun which throw out plasma into the space, right? And these are very energetic. These are, to give you an understanding of how energetic these are, the energy released is equivalent to a billion hydrogen bombs going off. Okay, so these are extremely energetic events. And here is another video which shows you the same thing from a different perspective. So right on the limb of the sun you can see a solar flare going off, and if you notice a bit closely, then you will see that as the solar flare goes off, it makes a loop kind of structure. Okay, so keep this in mind because this is a hint towards what is causing the solar flare. So what is causing the solar flare is magnetic reconnection, which is what is also there in the title of the talk. So this is an important slide, so please pay attention because this is the main engine behind the solar flare occurrence. So first let me tell you simply what magnetic reconnection is. It is basically coming together of anti-parallel magnetic field lines, and when they come towards each other they reconnect, and in that reconnection they release a lot of energy. Okay, and that is the energetic event that you see. So let me go a bit slowly now. So in the leftmost panel what you see are these anti-parallel magnetic field lines. So you have the red color field lines which are going down and the blue color field lines which are going up. Now if you push the field lines together, then at the very interface you have a current sheet formation. Okay, and right at the current sheet the effect of electrical resistance goes up. Okay, so I just now told you some time ago, flux freezing is an important thing in highly conducting plasmas. But if you have regions where the resistance becomes important, then the flux freezing breaks down. Okay, so right at the current sheet, flux freezing breaks down, and this magnetic field actually breaks. Okay, and when they break, then they also reconnect with the magnetic field line from the other side. So you get these new field lines which form after this reconnection. Okay, and these new field lines exit the reconnection site with great energy. So what have I told you now in summary? So there are these anti-parallel magnetic field lines which come towards each other. They interact right at the current sheet where the electrical resistance is high, flux freezing breaks down, because of which the magnetic fields break and then they reconnect to form new magnetic fields. So there is a topological rearrangement, and this whole process is accompanied by release of energy. Okay, so there is some conversion from magnetic energy to kinetic energy. By the way, if something is not very clear, please feel free to interrupt and ask me. There is no issue. Yeah. It's a good question. So usually, yeah. So one of the audience participant has asked, what is causing these magnetic field lines to come close? So So in general, there are all these flows in plasma, and most of the times these field lines do come by accident. They don't I mean, unless there is some external force that is pushing them together, but usually because the system is somewhat turbulent, so the flows simply accidentally bring magnetic fields towards each other, okay? And then right at the interface, you will have a current sheet formation. Is that okay? Yeah, so to continue further, this is another animation which just shows this reconnection just continuously happening. So you have magnetic field lines, anti-parallel magnetic field lines, which come towards each other, and right at the current sheet, they reconnect and then they exit the reconnection site and so on.
When the solar flare is existing, is it also that there is another solar flare inside the sun, goes inside the sun with the same speed?
So I will come to that. It's a good question. So you are basically saying if there is one side which is being thrown out, what happens to the other side? Yeah. So let me come to that because I've not yet built up to it. So yeah. So now I've been telling you that these magnetic fields have been sticking out of the sun, right? So here is the animation of that. So what's happening is that these magnetic fields to begin with are underneath the surface of the sun, but because of buoyancy and some other physics, they are being brought out of the surface of the sun, and then they stick out as loops, right? And as they come out of the surface of the sun, they bring plasma along with it, or all the material along with it. And that material, when it cools, it comes back down as plasma rain, which is what you have been seeing in this video, right? So now we go further, and what I want to tell you now is that these loops which are sticking out of the sun, what happens with them is that this is basically like a magnetic field line, right? So it's going up in one direction and it is coming down in the other direction. So you can immediately see that this is anti-parallel, right? So if these strands of the loop come together and reconnect, then you can have our reconnection and an explosion, etc. Right? So this particular video will kind of show you at the very end that this is a possibility that happens, though that particular last part is in animation, but let's just have a look at it. So that's an animation of the reconnection event that can take place with the magnetic loops that are sticking out of the sun, right? So, so before I go to this one, I want to go back to the other one that I was showing you. Here, if you notice again, now it will make sense why there was like a loop kind of structure, right? So let's look at this again. So it will play in a little bit slowly now, so we can take a look at it. So you can see immediately there's like a loop structure, and there is a little bit of a pinch in the loop which kind of indicates that there was a magnetic reconnection process. Okay. So here you were asking just now what happens to the other side. Some of it could just fall back on the sun, but because this is a highly explosive event, some of it just, it could be actually carried again out into space. Some of of course the velocity is on the one side and it's on the other side, but you know, the overall listing could be that it is basically thrown out into space. Alright, so now I want to show you the full story. So this is a video of the full story starting from the sun and ending at the earth. So here we see again the magnetic field loop sticking out, and then it undergoes reconnection in about a second, and this plasma which gets thrown out travels towards Earth, and then that plasma actually performs reconnections with the Earth's magnetic field, and that is how a lot of the electrically charged, highly energetic particles get transferred to the magnetosphere. So reconnection was not only important at just the solar flare, but also important near the Earth's magnetosphere. And finally, we have the aurorae, etc., of course. So let me just play the video again, because let's have a look at it again. So first there is a reconnection at the sun's surface, which is why the plasma gets thrown out. It goes towards the Earth, and there is magnetic fields in that plasma, right? It reconnects and transfers all the particles to the Earth's magnetosphere, and then those particles go towards the pole, interact with the atmosphere there, and cause aurorae. Okay, so now I would like to tell you a little bit about the history of reconnection, like who discovered it first, and then like what happened next, like what is the evolution of the study, right? So the first model was already proposed like about like half a century ago, and it was by Sweet and Parker. So this is Eugene Parker, one of the two people who suggested the first model in 1956. Now this model was mainly two-dimensional, and I mean it had its limitations. It was two-dimensional in nature, and something called steady state model, which means it doesn't have the feature of being bursty, etc., like the way we see in the this solar flare picture. So also, most importantly, it predicted a reconnection rate which was too slow. Okay, so the solar flares that we see are typically happening on a time scale which is about 2 hours, but this particular model predicts a time scale which is like a week long or even month long, etc. So there's a huge disparity in these time scales. So it is absolutely slow to explain these solar flares. Now the other model that was proposed was in the context of fusion plasmas. So fusion plasmas are the plasma physicists who study reconnection a lot, but in the context of fusion, because there they have to worry about confining the fusion reactions within a magnetic structure, okay, because you need to have the energy that is produced within a confined region so that you can use it usefully, right? Otherwise a bomb going off somewhere, you cannot use that energy, right? You have to have it confined within a magnetic structure. So the thing is they identified something called the tearing instability, Furth-Kilin and Rosenbluth in 1963, and Copy extended it to other parameter regimes. But again, this was like a slow model. This couldn't explain, you can't use it for solar flares, etc. And then Petschek in 1964 provided a model which was fast, but the problem was that you could not see the manifestation of that model in either simulations or experiments. So again, that was not a great one. Finally, the whole problem was solved like, you know, many decades later. So in 2000s, in early 2000s, people started seeing in their simulations, and these were slightly more higher resolution simulations which had higher and higher conductivity. Remember, the plasma in astrophysics is highly conducting. So if you increase the resolution, you can also increase the conductivity. That is the key point. And so these simulations were very helpful. They showed that, you know, in these magnetic reconnection simulations, you could see some very tiny islands arise. And when they measured the reconnection rate, it seemed to have a larger value. So then it was identified that basically there is something called plasmoid instability that is taking place, and that happens only when you have higher and higher conductivity. Okay. And so this is an example of computers telling us something that we couldn't have predicted so easily. Okay, so this is a nice example of that. And in 2007, Loureiro et al. Provided an explanation for the plasmoid instability, and Bhattacharjee and Huang showed that this instability, this model for reconnection finally solved the time scale problem. So this was fast reconnection. So you can see that these magnetic field lines are coming together, and the important difference between this and like the previous models is that there are multiple points at which reconnection takes place, whereas the previous model had like a uniform layer of reconnection happening. Okay. So then what happens is between these multiple points, the magnetic flux that is coming towards each other, that gets collected in form of small islands. And then these small islands grow as the magnetic reconnection takes place further and further. So that is what is happening in these pictures. So let me show you now. Yeah.
Is this solely based on simulations or like is there any like analytical?
Yeah, so if we go back, the Loureiro 2007, though the initial hints were in the simulation, the 2007 paper worked out in detail the whole analytical thing. Okay. Yeah, so here is a simulation that I want to show you, which shows this plasmoid instability and what happens in the in this kind of reconnection. So this is a simulation by Vinay Kumar, who is a PhD student at ICTS. Yeah, so let me play the video. So you can see what's again the magnetic field lines come towards each other, and at the reconnection site or the current sheet, they reconnect and form these small islands. And this is extremely dynamical. You can see that the islands actually grow and then they merge with each other, etc. But eventually they kind of exit the reconnection site from the left and the right, etc. But this whole process is very dynamical. There are multiple points of reconnection, and the fact that there are multiple points of reconnection is what is important, because that is what leads to very large speeds of reconnection. So this kind of solves the time scale problem. So we have fast reconnection. So one can ask whether reconnection is only useful to understand just solar flares. Can they be applied to understand anything else? And the answer is absolutely yes, because we know that in astrophysics there are many phenomena which are highly energetic. So there are novae, there are these GRBs, gamma ray bursts, there are these jets. So in many of these contexts, reconnection plays a very important role. So one of the important things that they do is they act as efficient particle accelerator. So I will be telling you a little bit more about that, because we at ICTS have done research on that. So let me tell you a little bit about that. So here is again a movie which shows reconnection, especially the plasmoid instability version of it, because that's the only one that makes sense now, right? So you can see again that the field lines come towards each other, reconnect, give rise to these tiny islands, which then merge with the bigger islands towards the end of the box, and so on. So this is a simulation in which we also added some particles. Okay. So now what happens is that these particles in the box will interact with the reconnection site to get accelerated. or energized. Now you must have heard of particle acceleration in another context. Does anyone know what that context is? Yes, but do you know of the experiment that does that?
Like in
Hmm?
the Large
The
Hadron
most
Collider
famous experiment for which won Nobel Prize, etc.
in Higgs boson.
But what was that? What is that experiment or what is that place called?
In
CERN, right? So the CERN experiment, I mean, so that absolutely is like a particle accelerator, right? Because where they kind of basically accelerate particles around this path, as the particles go round and round, there is an electric field through which it is made to pass again and again, so that it gains more and more energy, and then ultimately they are made to collide against each other to basically simulate the kind of environment you have in the early universe, etc. Okay, and to see what happens at very high energies and so on. So reconnection is interestingly efficient particle accelerator. So what I will show you is that in this simulation which I kind of showed you earlier, where the plasma was reconnecting, now we have particles added on top of it, and you will see that these particles will interact with the current sheet. And I've told you before that the current sheet is where you can have electric fields, right? So it will get accelerated due to the electric fields, and then in the bottom panels what you will see is that all the particles are initially at the level of 0, so they have very low energy, but as they interact with the current sheet, etc., with the reconnection, etc., they come up, and this is the scale which indicates the energy of the particle. So as it comes up, that is the indication that it is getting energized or accelerated. So this particular simulation was performed by Dr. Shubham Ghosh, a postdoctoral scientist at ICTS. So you can see that slowly what's happening is that these particles which were hanging out in the background, they come towards the current sheet and interact with the current sheet and get energized. And you can see that these particles are basically, these are the same particles as these but shown in a different point of view. They come up and up, showing that they are getting energized, right? So ultimately they come within the islands and so on, but they are energetic, they've been energized right now. So this whole experiment was performed. Why? Because we wanted to understand the radiation in galaxy clusters. So you must be wondering what is the connection, right? So the idea is that, okay, first let me tell you what are galaxy clusters. Now galaxy clusters are the biggest gravitationally bound objects which contain lot of galaxies. Just like a galaxy contains lot of stars, galaxy clusters contain lot of galaxies. So on the left hand side, this is an optical image which consists of lot of galaxies, etc., right? And the same image, if you see it in the radio, you see it as one big blob, right? And that is because you would think that these are just individual galaxies, but they are being held together, okay, gravitationally, and there's also gas there, and that gas is emitting this radio emission, radiation that we are getting, okay? And this radio emission can happen only if you have very highly energetic particles which are accelerated to relativistic speeds, okay? So only if you have relativistic particles, then they will emit this kind of radiation. Now how do we explain the existence of such very highly energetic particles which are moving about at relativistic speeds? Okay, so magnetic reconnection we have shown is one of the very interesting and very plausible candidates that could do this. That was what this work was about. Okay, so with that I come to the end of my talk. So here I show that, come back to this picture again, where I initially showed you that, you know, there are solar flares happening on the sun. That is being caused by magnetic reconnection, and the solar flares throw out plasma which moves towards Earth, carried by the solar wind, and at the Earth they are interacting with the magnetosphere and transferring all the energetic particles to the magnetosphere, and that is interacting with the atmosphere to cause aurorae, right? So in this whole story, the one component that I didn't very much talk about is the solar wind. But the person who was responsible for this, for predicting the existence of solar wind was again Eugene Parker, right? So this is Eugene Parker again. So he is this brilliant astrophysicist who contributed a lot to plasma astrophysics. So not only did he come up with the models for reconnection, he also came up with model understanding of something called dynamo. Dynamo is the mechanism which kind of produces magnetic field and sustains them on the sun, on Earth, etc. So there is a dynamo going on in the Earth also in the interior core. So there is a dynamo in the sun, etc. So all of this was Parker who came up with very first ideas. So he passed away only 2 years ago, and so I just wanted to mention his contributions. And in fact, one of the latest satellites which has been sent out to observe sun is called the Parker Solar Probe, which was named after him, and it's probably the only space instrument which was named after a living scientist, interestingly. And this was launched in 2018, and it is observing the sun and relaying all the data that it's getting from the sun. It's the instrument which is probably the closest to the sun. There are many instruments observing the sun, SDO, Hinode, but this one is the one which is closest, and it's going to address other very interesting questions related to the sun, coronal heating, solar wind, many other things. I have only told you one part of the story today. And I just wanted to briefly mention that, you know, Eugene Parker was a PhD student with Subramanian Chandrasekhar, and he is our Indian American scientist who won the Nobel Prize, etc. So yeah, with that I will end my talk, and if you have any more questions, then please feel free to ask. I will leave this particular slide on for you to see.
Hi, do you have any popular book recommendation that talks about magnetic fields in like an astrophysical context? Has anyone written a popular book without much equations and more physics?
Oh, that's a good question. One of the people who have written books on the popular side is Arnab Rai Chaudhary in IISc. So he has definitely written a book on the sun. And so he will invariably mention magnetic fields because he himself works on dynamos, magnetic fields, etc. So you can check that out. But I'm slightly at loss because what has happened is that most of the astrophysics studies had ignored magnetic fields for a very long time, kind of brushed under the carpet, but eventually they turned out to be important players. So I am not sure if there are any other very good books just on magnetic fields.
On the question raised by him, Vigyan Prasar is DST. That website you see, there should be some book, I am sure. And in Kannada, one writer, G.T. Narayan Rao from Mysore. He has written in Kannada, but if you are not able to, then that is a problem. But lot of this astrophysics inside the working of the sun and all has been written. But that material may be, what you have talked is more advanced. But people have written local language also. In Vigyan Prasar website, if you check, there must be some book, and I can tell you.
In fact, magnetic fields become very important in the context of pulsars and other things called neutron stars. And these same things are also important in the context of gravitational waves, which has been in news quite a bit. So, in fact, when these these objects like these compact objects interact, they have very strong magnetic fields, and so you can see some sort of electromagnetic afterglow after the gravitational waves. So that is something that is in research, and that's something that people are looking for, etc.
What exactly would happen if two loops of a solar flare come together?
So you mean two separate loops?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's possible that there are reconnections that are happening between all sorts of loops. One is this loop interacting with itself, and then you can have interaction between loops. But depending on the topology, they will either release some plasma or they will not. Depends.
Hello. Yeah. You spoke about the intergalactic interactions. In that, and even in a general sense, do magnetic fields also act as carriers of matter?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because you saw initially, very initially, when I was showing, the trapped particles in the magnetosphere, right? So these charged particles are following the structure of the magnetic field. They are like circulating
There
around.
is a lot of matter which is carried by the magnetic field from the sun to the earth, and even in between galaxies. So that is possible.
Yeah, even that is possible. In fact, that is definitely like a very active field of research, and the other important idea in this context is turbulence. Okay, so most of these plasmas are extremely turbulent. Because of various instabilities, and generally like astrophysics is completely violent, right? There are many things going on all the time, and because of this there's release of energy all the time, which kind of shakes up the flow and causes turbulence. And the interaction of turbulence and magnetic field can have much impact on how matter is transported from one place to another, etc. For example, there are these ideas that even in star formation, how magnetic field will impact the amount of stars that form, etc., because it can move matter around. Was that okay, or you had something else to ask? I have a lot of questions. Okay, right, yeah.
Thanks for the wonderful talk. Just two small questions. One is like as you showed that front of the that solar flare coming. So this aurora, like how do we know actually is not that magnetic field coming and going from top, but then you showed due to reconnection it's coming this way. So how do we know the auroras are not through this and through for reconnection?
Sorry, auroras are not through what?
No, see, one is, let's say, the flare coming with the charged particles and things, so it can kind of enter the follow the magnetic field and enter from top or bottom, right? And the other is the reconnection thing which you showed. If you go back to that animation, I think.
Sure, yeah. This is the one.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So basically, how do you distinguish, or I mean, the auroras are not directly as a result of reconnection.
Ah, you mean not from the front, but from the back, etc.
Yeah,
Or
I think when we come to this, it's coming, yeah. So some will be entering from, yeah, right? And also you have this thing, because of the reconnection, they are coming.
yeah, so these magnetic field lines go back and then they reconnect with the magnetosphere from the other side.
So
That is
auroras
true.
have come due to both,
Yeah, actually they come due to both, because in both cases there's transfer of particles, which if didn't happen fully in the front side, then it can happen when it goes towards the back. And
and is there a way to distinguish, because one is coming more vertically and the other is coming more horizontally?
yeah, there will be time delays, right? Depending on how, if this solar wind front is interacting with the magnetosphere, then you can predict immediately how, what is the time delay from the time when the solar flare happened to now, and accordingly predict that if this charged particle is coming from the front or the back, etc.
Thanks. And one more question, slightly not related to your direct content, but you showed inside the sun, right? This thing. So how do we study or know about the dynamics inside the sun? I mean, it's happening.
Right, right.
inside
It's
the-
very
I just wanted to
interesting,
understand.
right? How do we know the interior of the sun? We know because physics, in some simple way, but yeah. So the thing is that there are all these stellar structure models which tell us basically that, so when I was showing you, I showed you how the sun has this core, and then there's a radiation zone, and then there is a convection zone. But interestingly, sun is a class of stars where this happens. But if you take very massive stars, this whole thing becomes ulta. Okay, so there is nuclear fusion happening, and then there is convection first, and then there is radiation. And all of this happens with respect to what is the temperature profile. Okay, so in the sun, the temperature doesn't have much of a gradient in the inside, but outside, towards the outer layers, it has a steep gradient. So when it has a steep gradient, steep change, then you can have this convection. But in the other case, when you have very massive stars, the inner temperature is so large that there is a gradient inside itself. And that's why the convection happens, and then the radiation zone comes about. So this is purely somewhat theoretical thing, but you can also have observational things which tell you what's happening inside the sun. There's something called helioseismology, okay, so which measures sort of the acoustic waves that are traveling in the sun, etc. So by making measurements of these waves which are traveling inside the sun, you can kind of measure the depth. There's some oscillations in the sun, etc. And so then these can tell you the depth of the sun, of the convective zone, and so on.
You told that the plasma is highly conductive. So, like, is there electricity in the sun?
Yeah, there are currents. There are currents all the time. So the currents, even in the earth, there is molten iron plasma in the earth, in the core of the earth. So similarly, in the plasma in the sun, you have these currents. But one interesting thing to ask is, we saw that there are these large-scale magnetic fields, right? Can we have large-scale electric fields? But we can't, precisely because there are these currents. So as soon as if there is a voltage, it gets shorted out because there are currents which are flowing through the plasma.
And I had one more question. I heard that like the sun has entered the solar maximum. Like, what does that mean?
Yes, so we are currently in the solar maxima phase, which means that we are going to have a lot of solar flares, which is precisely why we saw one on May 11th. So what happens is that the sun is undergoing this kind of solar maxima and minima, And so when it's undergoing maxima, even the magnetic fields, etc., get stronger. There's something called sunspots. So these sunspots are the regions where the magnetic fields are very strong. Okay, and so when you are in a solar maximum, the sunspots are more and more, and in the minimum you don't hardly have any sunspots. And interestingly, this cyclic pattern is a very robust pattern. So it's called like a 22-year solar cycle. Okay, so that has been observed from way back, like even before 90, from maybe like 1700s and so on. So we have known that, you know, these solar cycles happen all the time. So there's a maxima and then the minima and maxima again. So right now we are currently in a maxima, which means you can, if you travel to Iceland or Alaska or, you know, Canada, you can see all of these aurorae all the time. Actually, you can see aurorae even on the normal days, even when there is no solar flares. But when you have solar flares, they get more intense, etc.
And is there any reason why it goes maxima and minima?
Sorry?
Is there any reason for it to be in cycles?
Why there is a solar cycle? This is the whole problem of dynamo, which is the other aspect of my research. So the whole thing is controlled by the magnetic fields. You saw that I showed you the sun has magnetic fields which are extremely chaotic, but interestingly they do have a large scale spatio-temporal organization. So even though the whole thing is very turbulent, etc., there is some pattern that is emerging out of this whole random chaotic thing. And that pattern is precisely the solar cycle, which is indicative of some very organized thing going on, and that will be explained by dynamos. And this problem is somewhat solved, somewhat unsolved, depending on whom you talk to.
Hello, ma'am. So you have talked about magnetic reconnection and its application in solar flares. So as part of my master thesis, I have investigated the role of Alfvén wave turbulence in solar coronal heating. So can we able to address this issue, solar flares and aurora, from the point of view of coronal seismology?
Coronal seismology?
Seismology, yeah.
It's a good question, because the thing is, the coronal heating problem is something that has not been like fully solved. In the sense, we don't know what is the dominant source for this heating. So people thought there are two ideas. One is that you have reconnections. So reconnections must be going off everywhere, which is releasing heat and heating up the corona. But there is another line of thought which says that there is turbulence, and this turbulence is turbulence due to Alfvénic waves, which is what you have been studying, right? So, and the thing is that the people who are studying reconnection or the reconnection side of the story are slightly at a loss to understand the coronal heating, because there are, if you look at the sun observationally, there are not too many flares going on all the time. Okay, there are big flares that go off now and then, but they are not that frequent. And if you thought these big flares were the ones which were heating up the plasma, then that cannot be the full story, because it's not sufficient. Okay, so there might be some small scale reconnections which are hidden, which are not being seen from the observations, but they are there possibly. But I think you invariably cannot escape the idea that there is Alfvén wave turbulence. Okay, and is there an interconnection between the two? Most certainly there is. Okay, there is turbulence and there is reconnection, and of course we at ICTS are also trying to study those in tandem, etc. So that is something that's kind of research in progress. Yeah.
I have a question. So how come this year the aurora were visible from such low latitudes, That's one. And the other one is also like, you'd show that video where there's a second side, the leeward side of the matter coming back in. So does other matter get accelerated further out from the other side?
Yes,
happens, is
yeah,
it?
absolutely. So the first question, what I was telling earlier, that so there was this G5 level of solar storm or the solar flare, which has occurred after a decade, and the decade exactly coincides with the solar cycle. So from one solar maximum we have entered another solar maximum, and because of that there is an intense solar flare that had occurred, and because of which we saw this highly intense light shows, aurorae, etc. And that's why when it becomes very intense, then the electrically charged particles, they can travel further down to further lower latitudes and so on. So that can happen. Otherwise, of course, you're never going to see any aurorae right at the equator, because the magnetic fields are too far out. But if you go slightly lower latitudes from say Canada, Iceland, etc., then you do get aurorae when there is a solar storm like that. Now the second thing that you asked was the dark side, right? Yes, so the solar wind doesn't just stop at the earth, it goes on further out to something called heliopause. So there is a gigantic magnetic field which is surrounding the solar system. So it stops where it interacts with the interstellar matter of the galaxy. Okay, so right there you have right till there you have the solar wind traveling. So all the material which was thrown away from the reconnections that happened on the other side will travel further out, etc.
So the models that have been discovered until now, so they must all be stochastic models, right? So do we have any real life experiments on Earth? Because we cannot create solar flares, we cannot go create such high temperatures. But is it possible to create physical experiments on Earth to study magnetic reconnection?
Yeah, so there are experiments to study magnetic reconnection. Some of these efforts were taken up mostly in the fusion plasma labs, because those guys do have all the necessary equipment and they have the necessary what have you, the tools which will get you to do these kinds of experiments. So there is something called magnetic reconnection experiment, MRX, in Princeton labs. Then there have been experiments in the UK, some experiments in Wisconsin. I don't think there have been particularly reconnection experiments in India. There have been a lot of laser plasma related experiments in some of the labs in India, but I am not sure if there were reconnection experiments. But typically these reconnection experiments have to take some plasma which is not necessarily highly conducting. So they are sort of a low level approximation of the plasma that you see in the sun. So you will not be able to replicate it exactly, etc. So that is a problem. But if you look at the fusion plasma magnetic fields, there you see something called sawtooth crashes, which are like reconnections and so on. But they will not be, again, the solar flare kind of things. So you're right, I mean, we do need reconnection experiments which kind of mimic the solar flare phenomena.
And what exactly is solar wind? Like there is no air, so why wind in the name?
So solar wind is simply outflow from the star. Okay. So the star is made of plasma, and then there is some outflow from the star. So interestingly, the gravitational potential is such that there's an interplay between the gravitational potential and the thermal pressure of the gas from the sun. So what happens is that it is such that it allows the outflow to get progressively accelerated. Okay, so the stuff, the gas that is flowing out from the sun gets progressively accelerated. It crosses, you know, the sound barrier, everything. It's basically supersonic flow, and that is what is called the solar wind.
So it acts like wind.
So yeah, it is wind coming from, the ulta of that is accretion. Okay, so the opposite is that you have some plasma from somewhere at the infinity, and that comes towards a central object and accretes on top of the central object.
That's what happens in black holes.
That also happens in black holes.
One last question, just to follow up on his question. So given sufficient strong solar winds or solar injection, can we see, let's say, such activity on higher altitudes, even on equators?
Higher latitudes, sir?
Even if you said it's not possible to see auroras on equators, but if we go higher up, let's say 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers, can we see these emissions higher up in the air? Or there's some theoretical bound saying that?
Yeah, if you go out into the space, from space satellites you can see the aurorae happening on the, in those latitudes.
Anybody sitting on ISS should be able to see it every day.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, the director of this institute, Guru Prasad, he has seen aurorae every night when he was in Alaska for 1 month. When they were deploying some satellite, something. So yeah.
One last question.
So I had one more question. Like, are these solar winds not messing up with Earth's magnetic field? Because it's getting disconnected from one point and getting reconnected in the opposite. So, like, how is it affecting Earth's magnetic field?
Yeah, very interesting question. So you're saying that isn't like a lot of the magnetic energy that's there in the magnetosphere just, you know, getting dispelled during this reconnection events? So I would say that is probably not the full story. So what's happening is that the solar plasma, which is traveling towards the Earth, is carrying magnetic fields along with it. So I would say that there could be some magnetic energy being transferred from one place. I mean, because the plasma then reconnects with the Earth, and there could be some transfer of magnetic energy in that fashion. But it's a good question. I have not thought too much about this actually. Thanks for the question.
If there are more questions, please join us over coffee outside.